Hello! Welcome to my channel. I'm Jason White. This is Jason's Weird Reads, and today I'm going to be talking about 8 book adaptations that I felt were better than the source material. Now, the old saying, the book is always better than the movie. And this is honestly, I would say this is mostly always the case. But there are exceptions. If you've been watching booktube for any length of time, you will have seen a few videos just like this one where people discuss books that they felt were adapted much better than the book, or than the book actually was. And that's sort of the idea behind this video. But in this case, there's some books in here that it's not that I didn't like the books. I actually enjoyed some of these books, but I still felt that the adaptations were much better than the actual book themselves. And some of these aren't just movies. Some of them are HBO series. I think there's one in here that's an HBO series. A couple of them are alternatively short stories that were adapted into movies that are actually some favorite movies of mine. And the short stories just weren't as good, anywhere near as good. Alright, so I'm going to start off with one that's fairly common. Even the author himself, you remember watching all the extras and you'd watch the commentaries on movies. Well, this movie has the commentary with the author, and in that commentary he admits that the movie is better than the book, which isn't to say it's a bad book. This is not a bad book by any means. I'm talking about Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk, of course. This book, the book itself is really good. It has Chuck Palahniuk's strong voice inside it. If you have ever read Chuck Palahniuk, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. He has a very distinctive voice, and this book is pretty much his voice. The story itself is one that's really captured the imagination of an entire generation. Honestly, Generation X fell in love with this movie, and I was one of them. I went to the theater to see this because everyone was buzzing about it. Everyone and their brother. I think this is mostly, although I do know some women who absolutely loved this movie. So it's not just a dude bro movie, although it has some really strong dude bro feels to it. But that's neither here nor there. I really enjoyed the philosophy within this movie. There's some really interesting things going on within both the book and the movie, but the movie really brought out the ideas and made them shine so much more than the book did. It's not to say that the book failed its message. It did not. It's just that for some reason, I can't articulate exactly why, the movie was just able to take those ideas and expand upon them, and it did it. Maybe it's just that the ideas presented in the book, the story itself, is just better translated into something visual rather than just brain candy. And by brain candy, I mean like food for thought. So maybe candy isn't exactly the best metaphor here to use. But I just really enjoyed that movie, and I watched the movie first. I've watched it like quite a few times before actually hitting up the book. And the book itself is solid. I absolutely loved my experience reading it too, but there's just so much more to the movie, and you're going to see maybe this as a theme, at least with these first two. Next, I have the HBO adaptation series that I was talking about earlier in this video, and that is, of course, Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I really enjoyed the series. Again, I came to this first before reading the book. But I remember sitting down and watching this and being absolutely captivated. I watched this alone, for example, and that's just something that doesn't happen for me, because when I set out to watch a series on my own, it's not that I lose interest. I just have my work schedule is kind of chaotic, and if I don't have a set schedule, then I just don't really stick to things like watching a TV series. I kind of need my wife to watch the series with me, because she'll push me. Are we watching the next episode now? Sharp Objects is actually something she might enjoy, so I don't know why. Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, I think I did try to get her to watch it, but she didn't like it, which is neither here nor there. I absolutely loved the way this series was shot, and it also has one of my favorite sort of flawed characters, and that is the alcoholic. I don't know why I like watching alcoholics when they're done right, but it's just one of the things I enjoy watching. The adaptation itself, though, really, again, like with Fight Club, it brought out the best parts of the book and expanded upon them visually, so that you could really sit there and think. And you know what? I think there was actually a lot more to the series, the mini series, than the actual book. The book itself, again, I liked it, but it feels lacking in comparison to the HBO series. Gillian Flynn is a very talented writer. It's the only book of hers that I've read, and I keep meaning to read some more. She's only read or written 3 or 4 books, so there's not really all that much more to catch up on. But you know, there's a lot of people who wish that she would return to writing novels, and I think actually she is working on a novel. I don't know if that's true, but I know that she's definitely made a bit of a shift in her career to working on television series such as Sharp Objects. I believe that she wrote a lot of Sharp Objects, not obviously not just the book, but the adaptation. And she's been working on a few other series, and I'm pretty sure that there's another series of hers that's completely original to the television that she's either working on or has released. I'm not sure, but I think I've heard that she is working on a book. Don't quote me on that. But the series for Sharp Objects, in my opinion, is just so beautifully done that you can't. It's really hard to make an argument, honestly, that the book is better in this case. All right, so we're gonna move on to the next one. This one is a bit of a. Nobody really talks about this, and I think it might be because not too many people have actually read the novella that this is based on. The author, again, as with Sharp Objects, had a lot to do with the source material. Obviously, he wrote the novella, but he also wrote and directed the movie. So there's some interesting aspects to that. And of course, I'm talking about Clive Barker's Hellraiser. The book, of course, is called The Hellbound Heart, and there's nothing wrong with the book itself. I really enjoyed it. In fact, I have an interesting story as to how I read that book. First of all, I've seen the movie countless times before reading the book, and I just started reading the book, and this is before I met my wife and was going out with my wife. So I was with somebody else. Her grandmother was in an old age home, and she was passing, and I had just started reading The Hellbound Heart when my girlfriend came to me, and she was like, I need to go to the old age home because I've been told that my grandmother isn't going to make it until the morning. So I was like, okay. She didn't drive, so excuse me. So I drove her there, and I thought I might as well stay because I had nothing better to do anyway, and I wanted to be there for her. And so I brought my book along. She did end up passing that night, but I got to read The Hellbound Heart during that time, which, let me tell you, is this reading that book while being there in support for somebody who's dying is a pretty strange experience. Let me tell you. So I read the whole novella in that time. It was an interesting experience. Let's just say that. So the adaptation itself, again, it just brings a bit more. There's also changes. I think this is where the adaptation is better than the book in this case. There's some significant changes, especially with the bad guy, Pinhead. The biggest change being that he's more menacing in the movie. Granted, in the movie, you only see Pinhead for about 5 or 10 minutes. He's not a huge character, but when Pinhead and the Cenobites all show up, it's memorable, and you're probably bound to remember those scenes more than any other scenes within the movie. His presence in the novella is very weak by comparison. And by weak, I mean like he has like a whispering voice instead of the commanding voice that Douglas Bradley brings to the role. And he's just more of like a ghostly menace in a sense in the novella. The story is also a little bit different in that the family, like the whole characters, they're all the same characters. They're just relationships to each other are a bit different. There's a different dynamic within the characters in both mediums. So it plays out differently in the movie, and I think the movie makes the drama hit a little bit harder, if not a lot harder, than the novella. Having said that, though, again, I enjoyed the Hellbound Heart. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I just think that Clive Barker is able to take the ideas in Hellbound Heart and turn it into something much more terrifying in the movie. Next up might create some controversy because this is one where people say the book is better than the movie, but I disagree. I read this book when I was part of the Goodreads group, Horror Aficionados, and we did a big buddy read of it, a group read, and everyone was saying how scary this book was, and I was just like, it doesn't scare, it's not scaring me. And I'm talking about The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. Now that's not to say that that The Exorcist is a bad book. By no means is it a bad book. It's not a bad book at all, but I just felt that the movie was able to capture the terrifying significance of everything. It actually is a fairly faithful adaptation. I just felt seeing it was more scary than the actual book itself. There's one scene in the book that everyone in the group, when we were reading it, said was scary, but I just felt was kind of silly, honestly. And it's the scene where Reagan goes, crab walks backwards down the stairs. It's not that part. It's after she's done doing that, she's like still crab walking, upside down like this. And the mother is like freaking out, as you would. And Reagan's like going at her legs, and she's like licking her legs. She's like, and I'm like, this is, okay, that would be terrifying in real life, but me reading this, my brain interpreting this, it's interpreting as like something kind of ridiculous. But that's just me. If you found that scene scary, and I'm sorry if I spoiled that for anyone, by the way, if you found that scary, then that's great. Honestly, it just didn't strike me as scary. So I really enjoyed the book, but again, the movie is better. And you know what? This is one of the movies that's considered to be one of the scariest movies ever made, so I don't think I'm completely off the mark on that one. Alright, now we're going into some short stories here, and they're both by Stephen King. So, both are also some of my favorite movies. But the short stories, I don't even really remember, although I've read both of them more than once because of the movie adaptations. They're so incredibly, I wouldn't say important to me, but I enjoyed them so much. So, the first one is 1408. This is actually another one where people might find some contention in my thoughts about this because this isn't really thought of as a good movie. Most people don't remember this as a good movie at all, but I absolutely love it. It's very strange, and I think that's why. Excuse me. People don't like when reality is played with to the extent that 1408 plays with this. And the short story itself doesn't really go into the depths of what happens in room 1408 that the movie does. The movie, I think, handles it all very brilliantly. It dives deep into the main character's psyche and what he went through in the past and what this room makes real for him when he goes in there. There's a scene actually at the very beginning of the movie with Samuel L. Jackson and John Cusack. John Cusack's the main character, and Samuel L. Jackson is like the owner, manager of the whole hotel. I don't know if he's the owner, but he's at least the manager. And he's telling him, you can't stay in this room. I forbid it. But John Cusack, his character, convinces him otherwise. That scene, I think, is one of the most awesome scenes in Hollywood history.
Oh, you think you're clever, don't you? I know the game.
It just hits home for me. I feel all comfy and cozy when I'm watching that scene. I love it. And I think there's a similar scene in the short story, but it's not half as intense, I guess you could say. Alright, so next up is Stephen King's The Night Flyer. Now, again, you could argue with me, and I would be okay with you arguing with me on this, that the movie isn't very good. I think it's a good movie myself, but there's a lot of cheese to this movie. But the short story is almost completely forgettable compared to this movie adaptation. The one reason why I would consider The Night Flyer, Stephen King's The Night Flyer, as one of my favorite movies of all time is because how much fun it is watching this movie. It's about a vampire who uses an airplane, a personal airplane, to fly around and feed. Basically, his airplane is pretty much a coffin. It's apparently a Cessna Skymaster. You've seen this airplane, so it's almost like I've read it as like almost like a serial killer, but it's not. It's a vampire, but it's almost like a serial killer because he's got like this mode of traveling in order to kill, so he doesn't get caught, and that's using an airplane so he can fly between all these smaller airports and find his victims. He often within the movie at least, he actually attacks some of the airport employees. And this movie has a very, very dark ending. And it's, I think, what impressed me the most about this movie, but I enjoy the entire concept from beginning to end. I really enjoy the main character. The main character is Richard Dees, and he's played by Miguel Ferrer. You probably recognize him. He's been in a lot of movies, and he passed recently, which was unfortunate. It was really sad, just for this role. He was also in one of the RoboCop films from the 1980s. He's been in a lot of things though, but he always plays like the bad guy, and he's a bad guy in this as well. And he pretty much gets what's coming to him by the end. But that's the main thing that I enjoyed about this. He plays a reporter. Richard Dees is a reporter who works not for any newspaper that you would have respect for. Richard Dees works for one of those sort of newsstand newspapers, the rags that spread all those lies. Just think of Bat Boy, just like one of those types of basically a waste on paper type of news reporting. And he's a slime ball. He's willing to do anything to advance his career, and he'll step over anyone. Doesn't matter if they're big or small. And he finds himself a rival with a new reporter who learns through him the hard way of what it is to become where he's at, because he's pretty big within all this. And that's another aspect. He's an unlikable character, but he's an unlikable character that I really enjoyed watching. So the short story itself is like, as I said, it's rather forgettable. The movie adaptation has a lot of memorable scenes, and it just expands upon the story in a very similar way of what I've been talking about. So I recommend it. Go in not expecting anything overly serious. The ending might even make you think it's stupid, but I found it very dark, but that's just me. But I recommend the movie anyway. It's supposed to be cheesy and campy. It's just fun. At least I found it was. All right, next up is one that actually makes a lot of these lists, and there's a good reason for it, I think. And that, again, it pulls from the source material and expands upon it in memorable ways. And that's The Godfather by Mario Puzo. As with all of these, I think, I came to the movie first. I mean, this was a movie that I watched when I was in my early teens, I think, maybe mid-teens. I know that my stepfather was really big into this movie, and we watched it a lot. I do have complaints about the movie as well. It's kind of boring in parts. It just drags. But the idea, like, in the one sense, the book is a bit better because it's not as boring, I found, as the movie can be. But having said that, the movie does linger on things that I think were kind of left out in the book, and that's why this makes the the adaptation better. And also the acting is just brilliant. I don't, you know, like the actors were able to read into the characters and pull out something and do something very memorable. I mean, when I was young, and maybe even still today, I haven't done it recently, but everyone used to do the Godfather talk, you know, like, I got an offer you can't refuse. You know, when you had like a favor to ask somebody, he'd be like, such a memorable film. People were able to remember it perhaps more so than the book. I don't know. Tell me what you think. If you've read both, if you read the book for The Godfather and you've seen the adaptation, let me know what you think deep down there in the darkness. Okay, one more. And that is The Killer Inside Me by Jim Thompson. This, again, I think, as I said, with all these, I watched the movie or the adaptation first. This is the movie that actually got me into Jim Thompson. I watched this movie a few times when it first came, when it was first released on DVD. I found it was very disturbing. It's about a police. I'm pretty sure he's a police officer, or at least a deputy in a small town who commits a crime, a very horrible, horrendous crime, and in order to cover it up, he has to commit other crimes because he's trying to hide the truth, and yet the truth keeps coming back at him. The book itself has a very similar plot, but the movie was able to take those ideas and make them so much more horrific, and I think that's why the movie stands out way more than the book does. The book, you know, Jim Thompson, he wasn't like a word master. He didn't write very flowery prose or purple prose, poetic prose. He wasn't very deep in that. He was very basic. I wouldn't say basic. He was very plain writer, but he was able to tap into a very twisted psychology within the books of his that I've read anyway, and bring these horrible characters into life. The main character is Lou Ford, and he's played by Casey Affleck. And Casey Affleck, this movie is actually kind of frustrating because Casey Affleck doesn't talk very loudly in this movie, and there's many times where I had to turn on the subtitles just in order to understand what the hell he was saying. But that's part of the performance. He's like that sort of whispering. He's sort of like the main Cenobite Pinhead in the Hellbound Heart. He's this whispering presence that's almost ghostly but very deceitful, and he does horrible things. He thinks the one reason why the book would be better is because you actually get to see his thoughts, and you get to see just how horrible this character is and how deluded he is. In the movie adaptation, you just get to watch it, but the watching of it is so much more horrific. The things he does to Jessica Alba in that film is just, it's horrendous. It's hard to watch. So that is my list for the movies and TV miniseries that I felt better adapted, or were better than the source material. So let me know what you think of this list deep down there in the darkness, and tell me of one adaptation that you felt, whether it's in this list or something else, that you felt was better than the actual source material. Thank you for watching. Keep being safe, keep being creative, and if you enjoyed this video, there's a couple more here. I really enjoy making top 10 lists, so you can check some of those out right there. Thank you for watching. Catch you in the next bookish video.